Yo, yo, yo. Brian, just JP, how you doing? How you doing, man? One love. Right. Good to see you guys. So, here we are. The Book of the Damned. That was kind of the introduction, I guess, that I did yesterday. But it was definitely very interesting. It wasn't easy to read straight away. After going from Gurdjieff to that, the use of language and the words and everything took a bit of getting used to, but anyway. Another live reading today. I think this is going to be the actual, obviously the actual contents of the book. Let me just move that. Right. The Book of the Damned by Charles Fort, 1919. In the autumn of 1883, and for years afterward, occurred brilliant coloured sunsets, such as never been seen before within the memory of all observers. Also, there were blue moons. I think that one is likely to smile incredulously at the notion of blue moons. Nevertheless, they were as common as were green suns in 1883. Science had to account for these unconventionalities. Such publications as Nature and Knowledge were besieged with inquiries. I suppose in Alaska and the Southeast Islands, all the medicine men were similarly upon trial. something had to be thought of. Upon the 28th of August, 1883, the volcano of Krakatoa of the Straits of Sunda had blown up. Terrific. We are told that the sound was heard 2,000 miles and that 36,380 persons were killed. Seems just a little unscientific or impositive to me. Marvel to me. We're never told 2,163 miles and 36,387 persons. The volume of smoke that went up must have been visible to other planets, or, tormented with our crawlings and scurryings, the Earth complained to Mars, swore a vast black oath at us. That makes it, in all textbooks that mention this occurrence, no exceptions so far so I have read, it is said that the extraordinary atmospheric effects of 1883 were first noticed in the last of August or the 1st of September. That makes a difficulty for us. It is said that these phenomena were caused by particles of volcanic dust that were cast high up into the air by Krakatoa. This is the explanation that was agreed upon in 1883. But for 7 years, the atmospheric phenomena continued, except that in the 7, there were a lapse of several years. And where was the volcanic dust all that time? You'd think such a question as that would make trouble. Then you haven't studied hypnosis. You have never tried to demonstrate to a hypnotic that a table is not a hippopotamus. According to our general acceptance, it would be impossible to demonstrate such a thing. Point out 100 reasons for saying that a hippopotamus is not a table. You'll have to end up agreeing that neither is a table. It only seems to be a table. Well, that's what the hippopotamus seems to be. So how can you prove that something is not something else when neither is something else some other thing? There's nothing to prove. This is one of the profundities that we advertised in advance. You can oppose an absurdity only with some other absurdity. But science has established preposterousness. We divide all intellection, the obviously preposterousness and the established. But Krakatoa, that's the explanation that scientists gave. I don't know what whopper the medicine men told. I'm just going to pause reading live there just to say, wow, God, doesn't this sound a little bit, familiar? Doesn't this sound incredibly familiar? Can't you see exactly what he's talking about now? Something happens and they come up with some ridiculous fucking explanation for it, and the official narrative that's put out is complete horse crap, and everybody knows it's horse crap because it doesn't make sense when it's broken down, when it's dissected and looked at carefully. It doesn't make any bloody sense. He's talking about the sun turning green and blue moons and stuff, and they say, oh yes, that's because Krakatoa erupted. But the phenomena lasted for 7 years, and there were gaps where there was no phenomena. So where was all the volcanic ash, and where did it all go? It doesn't make any sense. I love it, man. We're replaying history right now. Just replaying history right now. We see from the start the very strong inclination of science to deny as much as it can, external relations of this earth. This book is an assemblage of data of external relations to this earth. We take the position that our data have been damned upon no consideration for individual merits or demerits, but in conformity with a general attempt to hold out for isolation of this earth. This is attempted positiveness. We take the position that science can no more succeed than in a similar endeavour could the Chinese, or then could the United States. So then only with pseudo-consideration of the phenomena of 1883, or as an expression of positivism in its aspect of isolation or unrelatedness, scientists have perpetrated such an enormity as suspension of volcanic dust 7 years in the air, disregarding the lapse of several years, rather than to admit the arrival of dust from somewhere beyond this earth. Not that scientists themselves have ever achieved positiveness in its aspects of unitedness among themselves, because Nordenskjöld, before 1883, wrote a great deal upon this theory of cosmic dust, and Professor Cleveland Abbe contended against the Krakatoan explanation, but that this is the orthodoxy of the main body of scientists. My own chief reason for indignation here, that this preposterous explanation interferes with some of my own enormities. It would cost me too much explaining if I have to admit that this Earth's atmosphere has such sustaining power. Later, we shall have data of things that have gone up in the air and have stayed up. Somewhere, weeks, months, but not by the sustaining power of this Earth's atmosphere. For instance, the turtle of Vicksburg. It seems to me that it would be ridiculous to think of a good-sized turtle hanging for 3 or 4 months, upheld only by the air, over the town of Vicksburg. When it comes to the horse and the barn, I think that they'll be classics someday, but I can never accept that a horse and a barn could float several months in this Earth's atmosphere. The orthodox explanation. Since the report of the Krakatoa Committee of the reading live, remember. See the report of the Krakatoa Committee of the Royal Society. It comes out absolutely for the orthodox explanation, absolutely and beautifully, also expensively. There are 492 pages in the report and 40 plates, some of them marvellously coloured. Sorry, just got to kill a cockroach. Some of them marvellously coloured. It was issued after an investigation that took 5 years. You couldn't think of anything done more efficiently, artistically and authoritatively. The mathematical parts are especially impressive. Distribution of the dust of Krakatoa, velocity of translation and rates of subsidence, altitudes and persistences. DN, how you doing, buddy? Willkommen. Annual Register 1883-105. That the atmospheric effects that have been attributed to Krakatoa were seen in Trinidad before the eruption occurred. Knowledge 5-418. That they were seen in Natal, South Africa, 6 months before the eruption. Inertia and its inhospitality. Or raw meat should not be fed to babies. We shall have a few data initiatorily. I fear me that the horse and the barn were a little extreme for our budding liberalities. Outrageous is the reasonable, if introduced politely. Hailstones, for instance. One reads in the newspapers of hailstones the size of of hen's eggs. One smiles. Nevertheless, I will engage to list 100 instances from the monthly weather review of hailstones the size of hen's eggs. There is an account in Nature, November 1st, 1894, of hailstones that weighed almost 2 pounds each. See Chambers' Encyclopedia for 3-pounders. Report of the Smithsonian Institution, 1870-479. 2-pounders authenticated and 6-pounders reported. In Seringapatam, India, about the year 1800, fell a hailstone. I fear me, this is one of the profoundly damned. I blurt out something that should perhaps be withheld for several pages, but that damn thing was the size of an elephant. We laugh. Or snowflakes, the size of saucers. Said to have fallen at Nashville, Tennessee, January 24th, 1891. One smiles. In Montana, quote, in Montana, in the winter of 1887, fell snowflakes 15 inches across and 8 inches thick. Monthly Weather Review, 1915 to 73. In the topography of intellection, I should say that what we call knowledge is ignorance surrounded by laughter. Black rains, red rains, the fall of 1,000 tons of butter, jet black snow, pink snow, blue hailstones, hailstones flavored like oranges, pink and silk and charcoal. About 100 years ago, if anyone was so credulous as to think that stones had ever fallen from the sky, he was reasoned with. In the first place, there are no stones in the sky. Therefore, no stones can fall from the sky. Or nothing more reasonable or scientific or logical than that could be said upon any subject. The only trouble is the universal trouble, that the major premise is not real, or is intermediate somewhere between realness and unrealness. In 1772, a committee, of whom Lavoisier was a member, was appointed by the French Academy to investigate a report that a stone had fallen from the sky at Lucé, France. Of all attempts at positiveness, in its aspect of isolation, I don't know of anything that has been fought harder for than the notion of this earth's unrelatedness. Lavoisier analyzed the stone of Luce. The exclusionist explanation at the time was that the stones do not fall from the sky, that luminous objects may seem to fall, and that hot stones may be picked up where a luminous object seemingly had landed, only lightning striking a stone, heating it, even melting it. The stone of Luce showed signs of fusion. Lavoisier's analysis absolutely proved that this stone had not fallen, that it had been struck by lightning. So, authoritatively, falling stones were damned. The stock means of exclusion remained that the explanation of lightning that was seen to strike something that had been upon the ground in the first place. But positiveness and the fate of the every positive statement. It is not customary to think of damned stones raising an outcry against a sentence of exclusion, but subjectively, aerolites did, or data of them bombarded the walls raised against them. Monthly Review, 1796-426. Quote, the phenomena which is the subject of the remarks before us will seem to most persons as little worthy of credit as any that could be offered. The falling of large stones from the sky without an assignable cause of their previous ascent seems to partake so much of the marvellous as almost entirely to exclude the operation of known and natural agents. Yet a body of evidence is here brought to prove that such events have actually taken place, and we ought not to withhold from it a proper degree of attention. End quote. The writer abandons the first or absolute exclusion and modifies it, with the explanation that the day before a reported fall of stones in Tuscany, June 16th, 1794, there had been an eruption of Vesuvius, or that stones do fall from the sky, but they are stones that have been raised to the sky by some other part of the earth's surface by whirlwinds or volcanic action. It is more than 120 years later. I know of no aerolite that has been acceptably traced to a terrestrial origin. Falling stones had to be undammed, although still with a reservation that held out for exclusion of outside forces. One may have the knowledge of a Lavoisier and still not be able to analyze, not be able to even see except comfortably with the hypnosis or the conventional reactions against hypnosis of one's era. We believe no more. We accept. Little by little, the whirlwind and volcano explanations had to be abandoned. But so powerful was this exclusion hypnosis, sentence of damnation, or this attempt at positiveness, that far into our own times some scientists, notably Professor Lawrence Smith and Sir Robert Ball, continue to hold out against all external origins, asserting that nothing could fall to this earth unless it had been cast up or whirled up from some other part of this earth's surface. It's as commendable as anything ever been. It's commendable as anything ever has been, by which I mean it's intermediate to the commendable and the censurable. It's virginal. Meteorites, data of which were once of the damned, have to be admitted. But the common impression of them is only a retreat of attempted exclusion, that only two kinds of substance fall from the sky, metallic and stony, that the metallic objects are of iron and nickel, butter and paper and wool and silk and resin. We see, to start with, that the virgins of science have fought and wept and screamed against external relations upon two grounds. There, in the first place, or up from one other part of this earth's surface and down to another. As late as November 1902, in Nature Notes 13-231, a member of the Selborne Society still argued that meteorites do not fall from the sky, that they are masses of iron upon the ground in the first place that attract lightning, that the lightning is seen and is mistaken for a falling luminous object. By progress, we mean rape. Butter and beef and blood and a stone with strange inscriptions on it. So then, it is our expression that science relates to real knowledge no more than does the growth of a plant or the organization of a department store or the development of a nation, that are all assimilative or organizing or systematizing processes that represent different attempts to attain the positive state, the state commonly called heaven, I suppose I mean. There could be no real science where there are indeterminate variables, reading live again, remember. There could be no real science where there are inter, indeterminate variables, but every variable is, in finer terms, indeterminate or irregular, if only to have the appearance of being in intermediateness is to express regularity unattained. The invariable, or the real and stable, would be nothing at all in intermediateness, rather as, but in relative terms, an undistorted interpretation of external sounds in the mind of a dreamer could not continue to exist in a dreaming mind, because that touch of relative realness would be of awakening and not of dreaming. Science is the attempt to awaken to realness, wherein it is attempt to find regularity and uniformity, or the regular and uniform would be that which has nothing external to disturb it. By the universal we mean the real, or the notion that the underlying super attempt, as expressed in science, is indifferent to the subject matter of science, that the attempt to regularize is the vital spirit, bugs and stars and chemical messes, that they are only quasi-real, and that of them there is nothing real to know, but that systemization of pseudo-data is approximation to realness or final awakening. Or a dreaming mind, and its centaurs and canary birds that turn into giraffes. There could be no real biology upon such subjects, but attempt in a dreaming mind to systematize such appearances would be movement towards awakening. If better mental coordination is all that we mean by the state of being awake, relatively awake. So it is that having attempted to systematize by ignoring externality to the greatest possible degree, the notions of things dropping in on this earth from externality is as unsettling and as unwelcome to science as tin horns blowing in upon a musician's relatively symmetric composition. Flies alighting upon a painter's attempted harmony and tracking colours one into another. Suffragists might get up and make a political speech at a prayer meeting. If all things are of a oneness, which is a state intermediate to unrealness and realness, and if nothing can succeed in breaking away and establishing entity for itself, and could not continue to exist in intermediateness, if it should succeed any more than could the born still at the same time be in the uterine, I, of course, know of no positive difference between science and Christian Science, and the attitude of both towards the unwelcome is the same. It does not exist. A Lord Kelvin and a Mrs. Eddy, and something not to their liking. It does not exist. Of course not, we intermediates say, but also that in intermediateness neither is there absolute non-existence. Or a Christian Scientist and a toothache. Neither exists in the final sense. Neither exists in the final sense. Also, neither is absolutely non-existent. And according to our therapeutics, the one that more highly approximates to realness will win. A secret of power. I think it's another profundity. Do you want power over something? Be more nearly real than it. We'll begin with yellow substances that have fallen upon this earth. We'll see whether our data of them have a higher approximation to realness than have the dogmas of those who deny their existence. That is, as products from somewhere external to this earth. In mere impressionism we take our stand. We have no positive tests or standards, Realism in art, realism in science, they pass away. In 1859, the thing to do was to accept Darwinism. Now, many biologists are revolting and trying to conceive of something else. The thing to do was to accept it in its day, but Darwinism, of course, was never proved. The fittest survive. What is meant by the fittest? Not the strongest, not the cleverest. Weakness and stupidity everywhere survive. There is no way of determining fitness except in that a thing does survive. Fitness, then, is only another name for survival. Darwinism, that survivors survive. Although Darwinism, then, seems positively baseless or absolutely irrational, its massing of supposed data and its attempted coherence approximate more highly to organization and consistency than did the inchoate speculations that preceded it. Or that Columbus never proved that the earth is round. Shadow of the earth on the moon. No one has ever seen it in its entirety. The earth's shadow is much larger than the moon. If the periphery of the shadow is curved, but the convex moon, a straight-edged object, will cast a curved shadow upon a surface that is convex. All the other so-called proofs may be taken away up in the same time. It was impossible for Columbus to prove that the earth is round. It was not required, only that with a higher seeming of positiveness than that of his opponents. He should attempt. The thing to do in 1492 was nevertheless to accept that beyond Europe to the west were other islands. I offer for acceptance as something concordant with the spirit of this the first quarter of the 10th century, the expression that beyond the earth are other lands, from which come things, as from America float things to Europe. As to yellow substances that have fallen upon this earth, the endeavour to exclude extra-mundane origins is the dogma that all yellow rains and yellow snows are coloured with pollen from this earth's pine trees. Simmons' Meteorological magazine is especially prudish in this respect, and regards as highly improper all advances made by other explainers. Nevertheless, the Monthly Weather Review, May 1877, reports of a golden yellow fall of February 27th, 1877, at Peklo, Germany, in which 4 kinds of organisms, not pollen, were occurring in the matter. There were minute things shaped like arrows, coffee beans, horns, and discs. They may have been symbols. They may have been objective hieroglyphs. Mere passing fancy, let it go. In the Annals de Chimie, 85/288, there is a list of rains that have contained sulphur. I have 30 or 40 other notes. I'll not use one of them. I'll admit that every one of them is upon a fall of pollen. I said to begin with that our methods would be the methods of theologians and scientists. And they always begin with an appearance of liberality. I grant 30 or 40 points to start with. I'm as liberal as any of them. Although my liberality won't cost me anything, the enormousness of the data that we shall have. Or just look over a typical instance of this dogma and the way it works out. In the American Journal of Science, 1-42-196, we are told of a yellow substance that fell by the bucketful over upon a vessel one windless night in June, in Pictou Harbour, Nova Scotia. The writer analysed the substance and it was found to give off nitrogen and ammonia with an animal odour. Does that sound like pee? That sounds like pee to me. Don't eat yellow snow. Now, one of our intermediatist principles to start with is that so far from positive in the aspect of homogeneousness are all substances, that at least in what is called an elementary sense, anything can be found anywhere. Mahogany logs on the coast of Greenland, bugs of a valley on the top of Mont Blanc, atheists at a prayer meeting, ice in India. For instance, chemical analysis can reveal that almost any dead man was poisoned with arsenic. We'll say, because there is no stomach without some iron, lead, tin, gold, and arsenic in it. And of it. Which, of course, in a broader sense, doesn't matter much, because a certain number of persons must, as a restraining influence, be executed for murder every year. And if detectives aren't able really to detect anything, illusion of their success is all that is necessary. And it is very honourable to give up one's life for society as a whole. The chemist who analysed the substance of PIC2 sent a sample to the editor of the journal. The editor, of course, found pollen in it. My own acceptance is that there have to have been some pollen in it, that nothing could very well fall from the air in June near the pine forests of Nova Scotia and escape all floating spores of pollen. But the editor does not say that this substance contained pollen. He disregards nitrogen, ammonia, and an animal odour, and says that the substance was pollen. For the sake of our 30 or 40 tokens of liberality, or pseudo-liberality, if we can't really be liberal, we grant that the chemist of the first examination probably wouldn't know an animal odour if he was a janitor of a menagerie. As we go along, however, there can be no such sweeping ignoring of this phenomenon. I'd suggest, to start with, that we put ourselves in place of deep-sea fishes. How would they account for the fall of animal matter from above? They wouldn't. Or at least it's easy enough to think of most of us as deep-sea fishes of a kind. Journal from the Franklin Institute. That upon the 14th of February 1870 there fell at Genoa, Italy, according to Director Boccardo of the Technical Institute of Genoa and Professor Castellani, a yellow substance. But the microscope revealed numerous globules of cobalt blue, also corpuscles of a pearly colour that resembled starch. See Nature 2-166. Comptis Rendus 56-972. M. Moise says of a substance, reddish, varying to yellowish, that fell enormously and successively or upon April 30th, May 1st, and May 2nd in France and Spain, that it carbonized and spread the odor of charred animal matter, that it was not pollen, that in alcohol it left a residue of resinous matter. Hundreds of thousands of tons of this matter have fallen. Odor of charred animal matter. Or an aerial battle that occurred in interplanetary space several hundred years ago. Effective time in making diverse remains uniform in appearance. It's all very absurd because even though we are told of a prodigious quantity of animal matter that fell from the sky, 3 days, France and Spain, we are not ready yet. That's all M. Was says, that this substance was not pollen. The vastness of the fall makes it acceptable that it was not pollen. Still, the resinous residue does suggest pollen of pine trees. We shall hear a great deal of a substance with a resinous residue that has fallen from the sky. Finally, we shall divorce it from all suggestion of pollen. I'm just going to pause, take a little pause, take a little break. Not a break, just a pause. Jump into the chat room. Sergeant Bun Bun, welcome. Thank you for being here. Brian, one love, buddy. JP, DN, good to see you, lads. 7 people. Only 4 chatting. That means we've got 3 lurkers in the background there. Welcome to the lurkers. Thank you for being here. Don't worry about it. You don't have to chat and let anybody know that you're here. Hope everybody's doing well. I'm doing well. I'm meeting up with my friend later, my friends from England. And yeah, doing well. My feet are absolutely killing me. Well, actually, they don't feel too bad now, but I haven't tried to put my shoes on, my trainers. The trainers that I've been wearing are like half a size or a size too small. But they were second-hand trainers that I bought off a mate. Adidas, really nice, and they were still comfortable. They were just really tight, which didn't matter when you don't walk much, when you don't walk around much. You know, I just walk around the block with the dogs, and then take them off when I get back. But of course, I basically just wore these shoes for 2 days and walked quite a long distance, and I've got blisters in between my toes. I never had that before. It's very uncomfortable. Anyway, so I'm just gonna have to fix up my other shoes and wear them to walk down today. But I'm gonna do this reading and then freshen up, take the dogs out, and then hopefully go and meet up with my mate. And I'm gonna today buy some new guitar strings. For my guitar, because my guitar has been sounding horrible. Or maybe people won't think it has, but it has. Trust me, to me, it's been sounding absolutely bloody awful. The strings are so damp and so dull. So yeah, new strings, and once I've got some new strings on, I'll get the old guitar out and play some music. Maybe have a little sing song, we'll see. But until then, I'm going to finish. Well, not finish this book. We're not going to finish this book today, but we will. How long are we going? 43 minutes. I'm going to read some more. We'll see where we are in an hour or so. A yellow powder that fell at Gerace, Calabria, March 14th, 1813. Some of this substance was collected by Signor Semenini, professor of chemistry at Naples. It had an earthy, insipid taste, and is described as unctuous. When heated, this matter turned brown, then black, then red. According to the Annals of Philosophy 11-466, one of the components was a greenish-yellow substance which, when dried, was found to be resinous. But concomitants of this fall, loud noises were heard in the sky. Stones fell from the sky. According to Chladni, these concomitants occurred. To me, they seem rather brutal, or not associable with something so soft and gentle as the fall of pollen. Black rains and black snows, rains as black as a deluge of ink, jet black snowflakes. Such a rain as that which fell in Ireland May 14th, 1849, described in the Annals of Scientific Discovery 1850 and the Annual Register 1849, it fell upon a district of 400 square miles and was the colour of ink and of a fetid odour and a very disagreeable taste. Oh my word, who would go and taste it? Bloody black ink type crap falling out of the sky. Who's gonna go and get a glass of that and get have a sup of it? Hey, Vampire Slayer, how you doing? Good to see you. The rain at Castle Common, Ireland, April 30th, 1887. Thick black rain. A black rain fell in Ireland October 8th and 9th, 1907. Quote, it left a most peculiar and disagreeable smell in the air. Sorry, this was in Ireland, wasn't it? It left a most peculiar and disagreeable smell in the air. End quote. The orthodox explanation of this rain occurs in Nature, March 2nd, 1908. Cloud of soot that had come from South Wales, crossing the Irish Channel and all of Ireland. So the black rain of Ireland of March 1898, ascribed in Simmons' Meteorological Magazine to clouds of soot from the manufacturing towns of North England and South Scotland. Our intermediatist principle of pseudologic, or our principle of continuity, is, of course, that nothing is unique or individual, that all phenomena merge away into all other phenomena. That, for instance, suppose there should be vast celestial, superoceanic, or interplanetary vessels that come near this Earth and discharge volumes of smoke at times. We're only supposing such a thing as that now because, conventionally, we're beginning modestly and tentatively. But if it were so, there would necessarily be some phenomena upon this earth with which that phenomenon would merge. Extra mundane smoke and smoke from cities merge, or both would manifest in black precipitations in rain. Bane Bear, good to see you. How you doing? In continuity, it is impossible to distinguish phenomena at their merging points. So we look for them at their extremes. Impossible to distinguish between animal and vegetable in some infusoria, but hippopotamus and violet. For all practical purposes, they're distinguishable enough. No one but a Barnum or a Bailey would send one a bunch of hippopotami as a token of regard. So, away from the great manufacturing centres, black rain in Switzerland, January 20th, 1911. Switzerland is so remote and so ill at ease is the conventional explanation here that Nature 8544-451 says of this rain that in certain conditions of weather, snow may take on the appearance of blackness that is quite deceptive. Just like the scientific, sorry, pause the live reading. Just like the scientific community to say, oh no, you can't see what it is you think you can see. Your eyes, yeah, it's an illusion. It's an illusion. It's a mirage. Chicago, being able to see it on the other side of a lake that's like 400 miles across. It's just a mirage, man. Maybe so. Or at night, if dark enough, snow may look black. This is simply denying that a black rain fell in Switzerland, January 20th, 1911. Extra remoteness from great manufacturing centres. La Nature, 1888, 2-406. That August 14th, 1888, there fell at the Cape of Good Hope a rain so black as to be described as a shower of ink. Continuity dogs us. Continuity rules us and pulls us back. We seem to have a little hope that by the method of extremes we could get away from things that merge indistinguishably into other things. We find that every departure from one merger is an entrance upon another. At the Cape of Good Hope, vast volumes of smoke from great manufacturing centres as an explanation cannot very acceptably merge with the explanation of extra-mundane origin, but smoke from a terrestrial volcano can. And that is the suggestion made here in La Nature. There is, in human intellection, no real standard to judge by, but our acceptance for the present is that the more nearly positive will prevail. By the more nearly positive, we mean the more nearly organized. Everything merges away into everything else, but proportionately to its complexity. If unified, a thing seems strong, real, and distinct. So in aesthetics, it is recognized that diversity is unity in higher beauty, or approximation to beauty, than is simpler unity. So that logicians feel that agreement of diverse data constitute great convincingness or strength than that of mere parallel instances. So to Herbert Spencer, the more highly differentiated and integrated is the more fully evolved. Our opponents hold out for mundane origin of all black rains. Our method will be the presenting of diverse phenomena in agreement with the notion of some other origin. We take up not only black rains, but black rains and their accompanying phenomena. A correspondent to Knowledge 5-190 writes of a black rain that fell in the Clyde Valley, March 1st, 1884. Of another black rain that fell 2 days later. According to the correspondent, a black rain had fallen in the Clyde Valley March 20th, 1828. Then again, March 22nd, 1828. According to Nature 9-43, a black rain fell at Malmesford, England, September 4th, 1873. More than 24 hours later, another black rain fell again in the same small town. The Black Rains of Slains. According to Reverend James Rust, Scottish Showers, a black rain at Slains, January 14th, 1862. Another at Carluke, 140 miles from Slains. May 1862 at Slains. May 20th, 1862, Slains. October 28th, 1863. But after two of these showers, vast quantities of a substance described sometimes as pumice stone, but sometimes as slag, were washed up upon the seacoast near Slains. A chemist's opinion is given that this substance was slag, that it was not a volcanic product, slag from smelting works. We now have 4 black rains, a concomitant that is irreconcilable with origin from factory chimneys. Whatever it may have been, the quantity of this substance was so enormous that in Mr. Rust's opinion, to have produced so much, it would have required the united output of all the smelting works in the world. If slag it were, we accept that an artificial product has, in enormous quantities, fallen from the sky. If you don't think that such occurrences are damned by science, read Scottish Showers and see how impossible it was for the author to have this matter taken up by the scientific world. Hey, Voynich, how you doing, buddy? Good to see you, mate. The first and second rains corresponded in time with extraordinary ebullitions of Vesuvius. The third and fourth, according to Mr. Rust, corresponded with no known volcanic activities upon this earth. La Science pour tout, 11-26. That is, between October 1863 and January 1866, 4 more black rains fell at Slains, Scotland. The writer of this supplementary account tells us, with a better or more unscrupulous orthodoxy than Mr. Rust's, that of the 8 black rains, 5 coincided with eruptions of Vesuvius and 3 with eruptions of Etna. The fate of all explanation is too close to one door only to have another fly wide open. I should say that my own notions upon this subject will be considered irrational, but at least my gregariousness is satisfied in associating here with the preposterous, or this writer, and those who think in his rut have to say that they can think of 4 discharges from one far distant volcano passing over a great part of Europe, participating nowhere else, discharging precisely over one small northern parish, but also of 3 other discharges from another far distant volcano, showing the same precise preference, if not marksmanship, for one small parish in Scotland. Nor would orthodoxy be better off in thinking of exploding meteorites and their debris. Preciseness and reoccurrence would be just as difficult to explain. My notion is of an island near an oceanic trade route. It might receive debris from passing vessels 7 times in 4 years. Other concomitants of black rains. In Tim's yearbook, 1851, issue 270, there is an account of a, quote, sort of rumbling as of wagons heard for upward of an hour without ceasing, end quote. July 16th, 1850, Bulwick Rectory, Northampton, England. On the 19th, a black rain fell. In Nature, 30-6, a correspondent writes of an intense darkness at Preston, England, April 26th, 1884, page 32. Another correspondent writes of a black rain at Crowle, near Worcester, April 26th, that a week later, or May the 3rd, it had fallen again. Another account of black rain upon the 28th of April, near Church Shetton, so intense that the following day brooks were still dyed with it. According to 4 accounts by correspondents to Nature, there were earthquakes in England at this time. Or the black rain of Canada, November 9th, 1819. This time it is orthodoxy to attribute the black precipitate to smoke of forest fires south of the Ohio River. Zurcher meteors. That this black rain was accompanied by, quote, shocks like those of an earthquake, end quote. Edinburgh Philosophical Journal. That the earthquake had occurred at the climax of intense darkness and the fall of black rain. Red rains. Orthodoxy. Sand blown by the Sirocco from Sahara to Europe, especially in the earthquake regions of Europe. There have been many falls of red substance, always but not always precipitated in the rain. Upon many occasions, these substances have been absolutely identified as sand from the Sahara. When I first took this matter up, I came across assurance after assurance, so positive to this effect that, had I not been an intermediatist, I'd have looked no further. Samples collected from a rain at Genoa, samples of sand forwarded from the Sahara, absolute agreement, some writers said, same colour, same particles of quartz, even the same shells of diatoms mixed in. Then the chemical analysis, not a disagreement worth mentioning. Our intermediatist means of explanation will be that, with proper exclusions, after the scientific or theological method, anything can be identified with anything else, if all things are only different expressions of an underlying oneness. To many minds, there's rest and there's satisfaction in that expression, absolutely identified. Absoluteness, or the illusion of it, the universal quest. If chemists have identified substances that have fallen in Europe as sand from African deserts, swept up in African whirlwinds, then assuasive to all the irritations that occur to those cloistered minds that must repose in the concept of a snug, isolated little world, free from contact with cosmic wickedness, safe from the stellar guile, undisturbed by interplanetary prowlings and invasions. The only trouble is that a chemist's analysis, which seems so final and authoritative to some minds, is no more absolute than is identification by a child or a description by an imbecile. I take some of that back. I accept that the approximation is higher, but that it's based upon delusion because there is no definiteness, no homogeneity, no stability, only different stages somewhere between them and indefiniteness, heterogeneity, and instability. There are no chemical ailments. It seems acceptable that Ramsay and others have settled that. There are no chemical elements. It seems acceptable that Ramsay and others have settled that. The chemical elements are only another disappointment in the quest for the positive, as the definite, the homogeneous, and the stable. If there were real elements, there could be real science of chemistry. Upon November 12th and 13th, 5902, occurred the greatest fall of matter in the history of Australia. I don't think that's a year. Upon November 12th and 13th, 5902, it occurred the greatest fall of matter in the history of Australia. Upon the 14th of November, it rained mud in Tasmania. It was, of course, attributed to the Australian whirlwinds, but according to the monthly weather review, there was a haze all the way to the Philippines, also as far as Hong Kong. It may be that this phenomena had no especial relation to the even more tremendous fall of matter that occurred in Europe, February 1903. For several days, the south of England was a dumping ground from somewhere. If you'd like to have a chemist's opinion, even though it's only a chemist's opinion, see the report of the meeting of the Royal Chemical Society, April 2nd, 5903. Mr. E. G. Clayton read a paper upon some of the substance that had fallen from the sky, collected by him. The Saharan explanation applies mostly to falls that occur in southern Europe. Farther away, the conventionalists are a little uneasy. For instance, the editor of the monthly Weather Review says of a red rain that fell near the coast of Newfoundland early in 1890. It would be very remarkable if this was Sahara dust. Mr. Clayton said that the matter was examined by him. The matter examined by him was merely wind-borne dust from the roads and lanes of Wessex. This opinion is typical of all scientific opinion, or theological opinion, or feminine opinion, all very well except for what it disregards. The most charitable thing I can think of, because I think it gives us a broader tone to relieve our malices with the occasional charities, is that Mr. Clayton had not heard of the astonishing extent of this fall. It had covered the Canary Islands on the 19th, for instance. I think myself that in 5903 we passed through the remains of a powdered world left over from an ancient interplanetary dispute brooding in space like a red resentment over ever since. Or, like every other opinion, the notion of dust from Wessex turns into a provincial thing when we look over it. To think is to conceive incompletely, because all thought relates only to the local. We metaphysicians, of course, like to have the notion that we think of the unthinkable. As to opinions, or pronouncements, I should say, because they always have such an authoritative air, of other chemists. There is an analysis in Nature 68 to 54 giving water and organic matter at 9.08%. It's that carrying out of fractions that's so convincing. The substance is identified as sand from the Sahara. The vastness of this fall. In Nature, 68 to 65, we are told that it had occurred in Ireland too. The Sahara, of course, being prior to February 19th. There have been dust storms in the Sahara, disregarding that in the great region there's always, in some part of it, a dust storm. However, just at present, it does look reasonable that dust had come from Africa via the Canaries. The great difficulty that authoritativeness has to contend with is some other authoritativeness, when an infallible clashes with a pontification. They explain. Nature, March 5th, 1903. Another analysis. 36% is organic matter. Such disagreements don't look very well. So in Nature, one of the differing chemists explains, he says that his analysis was of muddy rain, and the other was of sediment of rain. We're so ready to accept excuses from the Most High, though I do wonder whether we're quite so damned as we were. If we find ourselves in a gracious and tolerant mood towards the powers that condemn, but the tax that now comes upon our good manners and unwillingness to be too severe. Nature 68-223, another chemist. He says that it was 23.49% water and organic matter. He identifies this matter as sand from an African desert, but after deducting organic matter, but you and I could be identified as sand from an African desert after deducting all there is to us except sand. Why we cannot accept that this fall was of sand from the Sahara, emitting the obvious objection that in most parts of the Sahara that in most parts the Sahara is not red at all, but is usually described as dazzling white. I'm just going to pause there because I live in the Canary Islands and we get red dust, and we get these. They're called. It's called a kalima, and we get heavy dust that obscures the view. Basically, makes visibility very bad, and gets in your eyes and gets in your throat and in your chest. It's horrible. But they say it's from the Sahara, and then they're still saying now to this day in America they're saying, "Oh, the red sand's blown over from the Sahara," and I've been saying the whole time the sands in Sahara aren't red. What WTF? The sands in Sahara aren't red, for God's sake. So, what's all this red sands from Sahara bollocks? Here and there, and in the UK as well. I remember them saying it in the UK as well. That is still their explanation for everything. the enormousness of it, that a whirlwind might have carried it, but that in some case it would be no more superstitious or doubtfully identified or doubtfully identified whirlwind, but great atmospheric cataclysm in the history of this earth. The Journal, the Royal Meteorological Society, that up to the 27th of February, this fall had continued in Belgium, Holland, Germany, and Austria, and that in some instances it was not sand, or that almost all the matter was organic. That a vessel had reported the falling as occurring in the Atlantic Ocean, midway between Southampton and Barbados. The calculation is given that in England alone, 10 million tons of matter had fallen. It had fallen in Switzerland. It had fallen in Russia. Not only had a vast quantity of matter fallen several months before in Australia, but it was at this time falling in Australia. Victorian Nationalist, June 1903. Enormously. Red mud, 50 tons per square mile. The Wessex explanation? Or that every explanation is a Wessex explanation? By that I mean an attempt to interpret the enormous in terms of the minute. But that nothing can be finally explained, because by truth we mean the universal, and that even if we could think as widely as universality, that would not be requital to the cosmic quest, which is not for truth, but for the local that is true. Not to universalize the local, but to localize the universal. Or to give a cosmic cloud absolute interpretation in the terms of the little dusty roads and lanes of Wessex. I cannot conceive that this can be done. I think of higher approximation. Our intermediatist concept is that, because of the continuity of all things, which are not separate, positive, or real things, all pseudo-things partake of the underlying, or are only different expressions, degrees, or aspects of the underlying. So then, that a sample from somewhere in anything must correspond with a sample from somewhere in anything else. That, by due care and selection, and disregard for everything else, or the scientific and theological method, the substance that fell, February 1903, could be identified with anything, or with some part or aspect of anything that could be conceived of. With sand from the Sahara, sand from a barrel of sugar, or dust of your great-great-grandfather. Different samples are described and listed in the Journal of the Royal Meteorological Society. All will see whether my notion as a chemist could have identified some one of these samples as from anywhere conceivable is extreme or not. Similar to brick dust, end quote, in one place, quote, buff or light brown, end quote, in another place, quote, chocolate coloured and silky to the touch and slightly iridescent, end quote. Grey, rust coloured, reddish raindrops and grey sand, dirty grey, quite red, yellow brown with a tinge of pink, deep yellow clay in colour. In nature, it is described as of a peculiar yellowish cast in one place, reddish somewhere else, and salmon coloured in another place. Or there could be real science if there were really anything to be scientific about. Or in the science of chemistry, or the science of chemistry is like the science of sociology, prejudice in advance. Because only to see is to see with a prejudice, setting out to prove that all inhabitants of New York came from Africa. Very easy. Sample from one part of a town, disregard for all the rest. There is no science but Wessex science. According to our acceptance, there could be no other, but that approximation should be higher, that metaphysics is super evil, that the scientific spirit is of the cosmic quest. Our notion is that, in real science, such a quasi-system of fables as the science of chemistry could not deceive for a moment, but that in an existence endeavouring to become real, it represents that endeavour and will continue to impose its pseudo-positiveness until it be driven out by a higher approximation to realness. That the science of chemistry is as impositive as fortune-telling. Or no, that though it represents a higher approximation to realness than does alchemy, for instance, and so drove out alchemy, it is still only somewhere between myth and positiveness. The attempt at realness, or to state a real and unmodified fact here, is the statement. All red rains are coloured by sands from the Sahara Desert. My own impositiveness acceptances are that some red rains are coloured by sands from the Sahara Desert, some by sands of other terrestrial sources, some by sands from other worlds, and from their deserts, also from aerial regions, too indefinite or amorphous to be thought of as worlds or planets. That no supposititious whirlwind can account for the hundreds of millions of tons of matter that fell upon Australia, Pacific Ocean and Atlantic Ocean in Europe in 1902 and 1903. That a whirlwind that could do that would not be superstitious. But now we shall cast off some of our own wessicality by accepting that there have been falls of rain of red substance other than sand. We regard every science as an expression of the attempt to be real, but to be real is to localize the universe, or to make some one thing as wide as all things, successful accomplishment of which I cannot conceive of. The prime resistance to this endeavour is the refusal of the rest of the universe to be damned, excluded, disregarded, to receive Christian Science treatment by something else so attempting. Although all phenomena are striving for the absolute, or have surrendered to and have incorporated themselves in higher attempts, simply to be phenomenal, or to have seeming in intermediateness, is to express relations. A river. It is water expressing the gravitational relation of different levels. The water of the river. Expression of chemical relations of hydrogen and oxygen, which are not final. A city. Manifestation of commercial and social relations. How could a mountain be without a base in a greater body? Storekeeper live without customers? The prime resistance to the positivist attempt by science is its relation with other phenomena, or that it only expresses those relations in the first place, or that a science can have seeming, or survive in intermediateness, or something pure, isolated, positively different, no more than could a river, or a city, or a mountain, or a store. This intermediateness wide attempt by parts to be wholes, which cannot be realized in our quasi-state, if we accept that in it the coexistence of two or more wholes or universals is improbable, higher approximation to which, however, may be thinkable. Scientists and their dream of pure science, artists and their dream of art for art's sake. It is our notion that if they could almost realize, then they would be almost realness, that they would instantly be translated into real existence. Such thinkers are good positivists, but they are evil in an economic and sociologic sense. If, In that sense, nothing has justification for being unless it serve or function for or express the relations of some higher aggregate. So science functions for and serves society at large, and would, from society at large, receive no support unless it did so divert itself or dissipate and prostitute itself. It seems that by prostitution I mean usefulness. There have been red rains that in the Middle Ages were called rains of blood. Such rains terrified many persons and were so unsettling to large populations that science, in its sociologic relations, has sought, by Mr. Eddy's method, to remove an evil, that rains of blood do not exist, that rains so called are only of water coloured by sand from the Sahara Desert. My own acceptance is that such assurances, whether fictitious or not, whether the Sahara is a dazzling white desert or not, have wrought such good effects in a sociologic sense, even though prostitutional in the positive sense, in the positivist sense, that in sociologic my own acceptance is that such assurances, whether fictitious or not, whether the Sahara is a dazzling white desert or not, have wrought such good effects in a sociologic sense, even though prostitutional in the positivist sense, that in the sociologic sense they were well justified. But that we've gone on, that this is the 20th century, that most of us have grown up so that such soporifics of the past are no longer necessary, that if gushes of blood should fall from the sky upon New York, business would go on as usual. We begin with rains that we accepted ourselves were more likely only of sand. In my own still immature hereticalness, and by heresy or progress I mean very largely a return, though with many modifications, to the superstitions of the past, I think I feel considerable aloofness to the idea of rains of blood. Just at present it is my conservative or timid purpose to express only that there have been red rains that very strongly suggest blood, or finely divided animal matter, debris from interplanetary disasters, aerial battles, food supplies from cargoes of super vessels wrecked in interplanetary traffic. There was a red rain in the Mediterranean region, March 6th, 1888. 12 days later, it fell again. Whatever this substance may have been, when burned, the odour of animal matter from it was strong and persistent. L'Astronomie, 1888, issue 205. But infinite heterogeneity, or debris from many different kinds of aerial cargoes. There have been red rains that have been coloured by neither sand nor animal matter. Annals of Philosophy, 16-226. That November 2nd, 1819, a week before the black rain and earthquake of Canada, there fell at Blankenberg, Holland, a red rain. As to sand, two chemists of Bruges concentrated 144 ounces of the rain to 4 ounces. No precipitate fell, but the colour was so marked that had there been sand, it would have been deposited if the substance had been diluted instead of concentrated. Experiments were made, and various reagents did cast precipitates, but other than sand. The chemists concluded that the rainwater contained muriate of cobalt, which is not very enlightening. that could be said of many substances carried in vessels upon the Atlantic Ocean. Whatever it may have been, in the Annals de Chimie, its colour is said to have been red-violet. For various chemic reactions, see something Journal Royal Institute. Something that fell with dust, said to have been meteoric, March 9th, 10th and 11th, 1872, described in the Chemical News, issue 25-300, as a peculiar substance, consisted of red iron ochre, carbonate of lime, and organic matter. Orange red hail, March 14th, 1873, in Tuscany. Rain of lavender-coloured substance. Rain of lavender-coloured substance at Udon, France, December 9th, 1903. La Nature, 1885, that according to Professor Shwedov, there fell in Russia, June 14th, 1880, red hailstones, also blue hailstones, also grey hailstones. A correspondent writes that he had been told by a resident of a small town in Venezuela that there, April 17th, 1886, had fallen hailstones, some red, some blue, some whitish. Informant said to have been one unlikely ever to have heard of the Russian phenomena, described as an honest, plain countryman. Nature, July 5th, 1877, quotes a Roman correspondent to the London Times who sent a translation from an Italian newspaper that a red rain had fallen in Italy, June 23rd, 1877, containing microscopically small particles of sand. Or, according to our acceptance, any other story would have been an evil thing in the sociologic sense. In Italy, in 1877. But the English correspondent, from a land where terrifying red rains are uncommon, does not feel this necessity. He writes, quote, I am by no means satisfied that the rains were of sand and water, end quote. His observations are that drops of this rain left stains, quote, such as sandy water could not leave, end quote. He notes that when the water evaporated, no sand was left behind. L'Année Scientifique, 1888, that December 13th, 1887, there fell in Cochin, China, a substance like blood, somewhat coagulated. The Annales de Chimie, 85, that a thick, viscous red matter fell at Ulm in 1812. We have now a datum with a factor that has been foreshadowed, which will recur and recur and recur throughout this book. It is a factor that makes for speculation so revolutionary that it will have to be reinforced many times before we can take it to full acceptance. The Yearbook of Facts, 1861, quotation from a letter from Professor Campini to Professor Mattuecci, that upon December 28th, 1860, at about 7 p.m., in the northwestern part of Siena, a reddish rain fell copiously for 2 hours. A second red shower fell at 11 o'clock. 3 days later, the red rain fell again. Then, the next day, another red rain fell. Still more extraordinarily, each fall occurred in exactly the same quarter of town. It is in the records of the French Academy that upon March 17th, 1869, in the town of Châtillon-sur-Seine, fell a reddish substance that was, quote, thick, viscous, and putrid, end quote, American Journal of Science. Story of a highly unpleasant substance that had fallen from the sky in Wilson County, Tennessee. We read that Dr. Truce revisited the place and investigated. Later, we are going to investigate some investigations, but never mind that now. Dr. Truce reported that the substance was clear blood and portions of flesh scattered upon tobacco fields. He argued that a whirlwind might have taken an animal up from one place, mauled it around, and have precipitated its remains somewhere else. But in volume 44, page 216 of the journal, there is an apology. The whole matter is, upon newspaper authority, said to have been a hoax by Negroes, who had pretended to have seen the shower for the sake of practicing upon the credulity of their masters, that they had scattered the decaying flesh of the dead hog all over the tobacco fields. If we don't accept this datum, at least we see the sociologically necessary determination to have all fools accredited to earthly origins, even when they're fools that don't fool. Annal Register 1821. That upon 13th of August 1819 something had fallen from the sky at Amherst, Mass. It had been examined and described by Professor Graves, formerly lecturer at Dartmouth College. It was an object that had upon it a nap, similar to that of milled cloth. Upon removing this nap, a buff-coloured pulpy substance was found. It had an offensive odour, and, upon exposure to the air, turned to a vivid red. This thing was said to have fallen with a brilliant light. Also, see the Edinburgh Philosophical Journal. In the Annals of the Chimie, 1821, Mr. Arago accepts the datum and gives 4 instances of similar objects or substances said to have fallen from the sky, 2 of which we shall have with our data of gelatinous or viscous manner, and 2 of which I omit because it seems to me that the dates given are too far back. In the American Journal of Science is Professor Graves' account, communicated by Professor Dewey, that upon the evening of April 13th, 1819, a light was seen in Amherst, a falling sound, a sound as if of an explosion. In the home of Professor Dewey, this light was reflected upon a wall of a room in which were several members of Professor Dewey's family. The next morning, Professor Dewey's front yard, in what is said to have been the only position from which the direct light that had been seen in the room the night before could have been reflected, was found a substance unlike anything before observed by anyone who saw it. It was a brown-shaped object, about 8 inches in diameter, about 1 inch thick, bright buff-coloured, and having upon it a fine nap. Upon removing its covering, a buff-coloured pulpy substance of the consistency of soft soap was found, of an offensive, suffocating smell. A few minutes of exposure to the air changed the buff colour to a livid colour resembling venous blood. It absorbed moisture quickly from the air and liquefied, and some of the chemic reactions, see the journal. For some of the chemic reactions, see the journal. There is another lost quasi-soul of a datum that seemed to me to belong here. Fall of fish that had occurred in the neighbourhood of Allahabad, India. It is said that the fish were of the Cholwa species, about a span in length and a seer in weight. They were dead and dry. Or they had been such a long time out of the water that we can't accept that they had been scooped out of a pond by a whirlwind, even though they were definitely identified as a known local species, or that they were not fish at all. I incline myself to the acceptance that they were not fish, but slender fish-shaped objects of the same substance of that which fell at Amherst. It is said that, whatever they were, they could not be eaten, that, in the pan, they turned to blood. For details of this story, see the Journal of the Asiatic Society of Bengal, 1834, issue 307. May 16th or 17th, 1834 is the date given in the journal. In the American Journal of Science occurs the inevitable damnation of the Amherst object. Professor Edward Hitchcock went to live in Amherst. He says that years later, another object, like the one said to have fallen in 1819, had been found at nearly the same place. Professor Hitchcock was invited by Professor Graves to examine it. Exactly like the first one, corresponded in size and colour and consistency, the chemical reactions were the same. Professor Hitchcock recognized it in a moment. It was a gelatinous fungus. He did not satisfy himself as to just the exact species it belonged to, but he predicted that similar fungi might spring up within 24 hours. But before evening, 2 others sprang up. Or, we've arrived at one of the oldest of the exclusionist conventions, or nostoc. We shall have many data of gelatinous substance said to have fallen from the sky. Almost always the exclusionists argue that it was only nostoc, an alga or in some other respects a fungus growth. The rival convention is spawn of frogs or of fishes. These two conventions have made a strong combination. In instances where testimony was not convincing that gelatinous matter had been seen to fall, it was said that the gelatinous substance was nostoc and had been found upon the ground in the first place. When the testimony was too good that it had fallen, it was said to be spawn that had been carried from one place to another in a whirlwind. Now, I can't say that nostoc is always greenish, any more than I can say that black birds aren't always black. Having seen a white one, we shall quote a scientist who knew of a flesh-coloured nostoc, when so to know was convenient. When we come to the reported falls of gelatinous substances, I'd like it to be noticed how often they are described as whitish or greyish. In looking up the subject myself, I have read only of greenish nostoc, said to be greenish in Webster's Dictionary, said to be blue-green in the New International Encyclopedia, from bright green to olive green in Science Gossip, green, greenish. It would seem acceptable that if many reports of white birds should occur, the birds are not blackbirds, even though there have been white blackbirds, or that, if often reported, greyish or whitish gelatinous substance is not nostoc, and is not spawn if occurring in times unseasonable for spawn. The Kentucky phenomenon. It was so called in its day, and now we have an occurrence that attracted a great deal of attention in its own time. Do you know what, actually? Let me just have a look. Yeah, an hour and 40. Right, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop there at the Kentucky phenomenon. I'm going to continue reading later. Nearly 2 hours. That's enough, man. That's enough. It's not. Some of the language that he uses, the words and stuff, it's very old. You imagine if people still spoke like that now. We've definitely dumbed down our language. So anyway, I'd like to thank everybody that's here, everybody that's sat and listened to me struggling through this book. I will continue reading the next opportunity I get to sit down for 2 hours and read. I shall, which will probably be tomorrow. But it might be later today. It depends. Depends what happens today. I'm not entirely sure what I'm getting up to, but I'm gonna contact my friend, see where he's at. Hopefully go and meet up. I've just got to fix my shoes first. We're being farmed. I'm not being farmed. There ain't nobody farming me. Maybe they're farming muggles. We're not muggles. Ross, dude, how you doing, man? You know that we don't have to just do the cat thing, you know, Hugh. If you still have you got the car still? How long have you got the car for? Let me know how long you got that car for, man. Because you know I'm gonna get some new strings today, so we can have a nice jam at some point. But yeah, I am TW. How you doing, man? Yeah, it's just a live reading, mate. I'm just reading this book, The Book of the Damned. And I can't believe how it relates so directly to what's going on and what we've witnessed, what they've exposed within themselves over the last 3 years. And it's it's like the globe theory and space and everything. I love the observations that this guy's making. Anyway, and I'm really loving Restream, certainly just for a single. I don't know what the sound's been like. Hopefully it's been nice and there haven't been any breaks or anything. It doesn't seem to have disconnected me. I checked on Facebook and I'm streaming live on Facebook, so haven't had anybody watching on Facebook. But then, to be honest, my Facebook account has been it's been dormant basically for 3 years or something. A long time anyway. I haven't used it for a long time. I don't have the app. I refuse to have the app on my phone anymore. Anyway, that's enough of all that. Thank you very much. No outro videos because this is the free version. I'll tell you what I can do actually. I'll tell you what I can do. Here we go. Here we go. Oh, do you know what? No, I wasn't sure if I'd be able to do this.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
Come back alive.
Let's start that from the beginning.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
Come back alive.
Quỳnh Xuân, nhìn mặt.
Second bases! On the fire down below! Gentlemen, I wash my hands of this way.
Right, love
name's
you guys. Thank you very much,
James Bond.
and I'll see you all soon. All right, have a good day. Peace.